Good.
Good evening.
We are live. This is Friday Night Live with the monks and time to chat. So if you have any questions that are related to the Dhamma, please write them into the chat and we'll do our best to our understanding of the Dhamma to answer. And if we don't understand the question or we can't answer it, then we'll tell you. So please, there's a question. It seems like, do we want to go through who's...
John, we'll say hello real quick.
Say hello to everyone real quick.
We have kind greetings from Rick. Oh, Rick, Kumu, Manal, Karuna, John. And that's who's here for now.
Okay.
So should we get started, Aya, with the questions?
We can. It looks like there's already a question for Aya Wada.
John says, can you please give some advice on learning Pali and some Buddhist-related Chinese? You seem to have excellent language skills, so I'm not so sure about that. But that's very kind of you. Advice for learning Buddhist Pali. Maybe you have some advice too, Aya. But I think what I would say is, I mean, I'm still a student myself, so. But what I would say is that really getting exposure is helpful. The thing, if you're interested in learning Buddhist Chinese, it's going to be a little bit difficult because it's not actually a major. Shockingly, that's not a major interest of the world. So there's not a lot of resources for it, and a lot of it comes from just learning classical Chinese and learning, essentially classical Chinese and the Chinese of the time, and then trying to just understand the Buddhist texts because they're a little bit mangled because they're translations, and every Chinese translator tended to have a different style. So sometimes they're a little bit difficult to understand, or they're not exactly perfect classical literary Chinese. So if you want to learn that, what I would recommend and what I'm kind of working on personally, because I'm trying to get some more exposure, is starting to just read the text. I would start with something basic and relatively short. And actually, I probably would start with a Mahayana Sutra, just because something like the Diamond Sutra, because that's a relatively short sutra, and in Chinese, they were translated around the same time, sometimes earlier than other agamas. So that if you want to learn the Chinese, actually, it's good to learn from a good translation. So there's a translator named Kumarajiva. He's very famous for his translations in Chinese, and many people still read them. Like if you read the Diamond Sutra today, you're probably going to read his translation in Chinese. And so that's a really short text. It's very common. Everybody in Chinese Buddhism knows that text. So something like that, or I would recommend reading, some kind of short sutra, and then just start reading and look up the characters, try to learn classical and Middle Chinese grammar. I think there should be some things online, but really getting exposure. And for Pali, a big recommendation from Bhante Sudaso, and that a lot of people, Bhante Sujato and others, is A.K. Warder's Introduction to Pali. That's a reader, so it gets you reading Pali with basic grammar. So I really recommend learning the grammar as much as you need to start getting started. And then once you get started, really just reading and using a dictionary and a grammar and going through and ideally checking with other translations. Yeah, that's my recommendation. Exposure rather than too abstract. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that.
I think that's enough. We may just try and stick with one question each unless... So was there one above that, or is that the...
No, not as of now.
Okay, okay. All right.
So another looks like down here.
Yeah.
We also have Joe, Julie, Yankee, Christina. Hello. And Kumo has a question. Can you please explain Nibbana Paramang Sukhang? It looks like it goes on. In the sense, is it due to absence of dukkha? How does it relate to the state of after Parinibbana, as there is no being to experience the sukha? So could you explain Nibbana Paramang Sukhang? This is,
the highest happiness of being Nibbana. And I think it's just part of it would be to overcome our fear of just the idea of just kind of being extinguished, as how the Nibbana is sometimes translated to be. Bhante Sujata was talking about Nibbana, like poof, you're gone. And so when you understand that the experience of Nibbana, when there is a residue, when there is this physical form here, is a very high happiness. It's like absence of all the irritation that we experience from the five khandhas and beyond. So that's really all I can say as far as Parinibbana. The second part, yeah.
They were asking, is it due to absence of dukkha, and how does it relate to after Parinibbana?
Yeah, so absence of dukkha with the relating to Parinibbana, and that no being is experiencing the Nibbana.
So if it's
I don't know.
Sukha.
See, this is one of those questions that the Buddha probably wouldn't even want to speak about because it's just it's imponderable because our experience is limited to the six senses, and so we can't. And then whether a being exists, whether Tathagata exists or an Arahant exists after Nibbana, Parinibbana, this was one of those kind of questions he wouldn't answer because it would be nothing. There was no way that the question could be phrased that would be able to, so that the question could be answered. So it's just an imponderable, but we just have to trust that the levels of happiness increases as we have less and less impact at with the khandhas or with the sense gates. So it has to be just when you're noticing the absence of dukkha. Why is that? It's usually because we're not being afflicted by the sense gates. There's a reduction in that, and that peacefulness is the sukha, and that's the best I can answer. I think eventually, if you're doing a lot of practice and letting go, and the mind is becoming more peaceful, just that awareness of okay, it's like shedding of the impact of the senses and with the aggregates. So
Thank
that's
you,
the
Aya.
best I can do, and we can go to the next. I think we'll just keep going.
So Rick asks, do monastics in traditional Buddhist countries try to dominate and control people, like many of the religious groups in the West? Or do they freely offer the Dhamma for the benefit of all beings? What I would say is that there's a little bit of an extreme going on here. Either all the monastics freely offer the Dhamma to all beings, and then other ones are controlling. And the reality is probably, as you would guess, the reality is that both and neither and in between. That, yeah, sometimes there are monastics who they might not be just because they're wearing a robe doesn't mean that they're, a saint or an arahant, as we would say in Buddhism. And so there are monastics who don't behave well, and that goes back to the time of the Buddha. That's not a recent phenomenon. And then there's other monastics who they behave very well, and there's some monastics who they might do a little bit of both, right? They're monastics. They might freely offer the Dhamma. They might do many programs, but maybe they get angry with somebody, or maybe they're very dogmatic, and so they want to convert people, but they do it by freely offering the Dhamma, right? So I'd say there's a big mixture. And I mean, in general, I would say, do they try to dominate and control people? Generally speaking, Buddhism doesn't have a history of colonial. Buddhist countries have been colonized. They're not colonial powers. So the thing with just briefly, is that part of our association with Christianity is this idea of colonial powers because of Christian ideology influencing Europe, and Europeans being Christians and Europeans having these colonial, journeys and conquests. There's an association of Christianity dominating cultures and taking over and converting everybody. Buddhism doesn't really have that history, but that's not to say that Buddhism doesn't have a history of conversion. That's sometimes you could say a myth that we have in the West, maybe among converts. There's this myth that, Buddhism doesn't convert. Actually, how did Buddhism get to Sri Lanka? It was sent there by the king. So Buddhism does have a history of, you could say, conversion, but it's not forceful colonialization. So it doesn't try to go in there and say, everybody's wrong. And when we do see Buddhism, it tends to be more syncretic, right? Because Buddhism is polytheistic in the sense that it accepts that there are beings other than just one God, right? So, but it's also it's not really deistic or theistic because it's not really focused on gods so much. So that makes it actually very friendly to other cultures, because let's say you go to a culture where they worship this god, they worship that god, they pray to these spirits, they do these, that's all fine, because in Buddhism, we have no problem with that. It's not considered a problem. It's more, the problem is that if you want to seriously practice the Dhamma, the practice is beyond that. But there's not like a doctrinal problem with worshiping other gods. Whereas with Christian powers, there's sometimes the idea, it's heretical, it's wrong, you're going to hell, right? So yeah, I would say that Buddhism doesn't have that history, but there are times when, of course, religious people, monastic or lay, will abuse the power, or hope that that's helpful. And I think we might have one for you, Ayasui Jana, from Jojo. I'm wondering if I'm going to get serious with the girl I'm dating. How do I know if she's the right girl for me?
I think just take a long time to figure that out. You have to learn, for yourself, and it depends on where you meet her and what you're interested in. Like if you just like to go out to the bar and drink, and you meet somebody at the bar drinking, then that's okay. If that's, what your standard is. But if you want a standard of someone who's keeping the precepts well, you might meet them at Buddhist monastery or something like that. But you still can't know. You have to just take time. And if that's what you want to do with your life, if you want to have, have a committed relationship, it's going to take time to know. There's no way I don't have the psychic powers. Just say, okay, bring the girl here and I'll be able to tell you just by looking at her. So if you have a common, bond over something important in your life. And I don't know you, Jojo, so I don't know what's important to you. So I can't really answer that question.
Okay.
And do monks or nuns have any advice? Actually, we're not even supposed to recommend somebody or have someone match people up, or say, if you were bringing somebody here to me and said, is this a good person? Or if you mentioned that person that I met that I actually I know, I can't tell you. It's against our precepts to match people up.
Mm-hmm. And just a disclaimer, Empty Cloud does not do couples therapy or any kinds of counseling. Okay. Good evening, P. Lee. And John has a question. Can you please give some advice on how to deal with our vices, e.g., for example, eating sugar, binge watching online content, etc.? Should we go cold turkey or use a stepwise approach? Advice on how to deal with our vices. Should we go?
So you're talking about sugar and
binge watching. Yeah, I would recommend the most important thing with giving up something that you want to give up is that you really have to want to do it. You can't just, you have to really set that goal. I would say that's the first step. You have to really, and you also have to have this passion. Giving something up, it will become much easier. It'll be much more natural. It'll be much healthier, usually, if we actually understand that that's a behavior that's maybe unwholesome or unhelpful for us, and we want to stop doing it, and we have that motivation, and we see that. So I'd really recommend, you already understand. So let's say eating sugar, binge watching content, that, oh, I don't want to be doing this with my time. I want to give this up. Really reflect on that. Like, really reflect on what are the drawbacks, and also what do you want to do with your time? Because that's one thing, is that a lot of times vices, they're habits of turning to things when we just find empty space, and we don't even necessarily have the mindfulness to realize we're just directly turning to that. That's kind of, the Buddha gives a simile sometimes of a pasture, a gochara. It's like the domain where the cow goes to get grass. So everybody, sometimes he talks about different, he uses the word in different senses, but it's like we have this pasture, we just go for it, and we just kind of dwell there. And so we have this habit, and we have to really develop an awareness of, okay, I'm filling my time with these vices. What would I like to do with my time? What would I like to do? And what do I not want to do? And why do I not want to do that? And so really establishing that, and not just once, but really reflecting on it, and trying to remind yourself throughout the day of this, of essentially how you want to spend your time. So really developing mindfulness of what you're doing to, I was talking about our senses and sense impingement. What are we filling our senses with intentionally? What are we exposing our senses to? How are we getting gratification? Because that's what the Buddha talks about: gratification, danger, and escape. So we have to see the danger, and we understand the gratification. So we have to understand, I'm gratifying myself with sugar. I'm gratifying myself with distracting content. I'm gratifying myself with this vice. And you have to understand, I am getting gratification out of this. There's some kind of, it's uncomfortable when my senses aren't being stimulated, or when they're getting neutral or unpleasant contact. So I'm turning to habitual patterns where I gratify my senses. We have to understand that. And then we have to understand the danger of, I don't want this because XYZ. That's where you have to really understand it. You can't just say, oh, there's a danger, therefore I'm going to give it up. The Buddha says we have to fully understand, fully know. And so really contemplating that. And then the escape, which is essentially giving it up. It's relinquishment, or potentially turning to giving it up in exchange for something higher. It might be the pleasure of giving it up. So you have to find an escape, which is really finding the benefit, the joy, the freedom that comes from giving up this vice. So you understand there's the gratification, but you understand the danger in that, and you want something higher. You want an escape from it. So fully understanding that, the benefit of that, and then developing the mindfulness to check yourself. So this really boils down, I would say, to sense restraint. You have to really be checking, are you getting caught up in your senses? How are you relating to your senses? Are your senses constantly being filled with stimulating things? And if you don't get that, then you turn to other things. You have to become aware of that, step one. And then you have to start to restrain it. The Buddha says it's like 6 wild animals. And if you tied each wild animal together with a rope, you put the rope on the foot, and then you put the ropes all together. So you have a knot and all these animals, and they're all pushing and pulling. And the strongest one will win. So like, let's say you have a monkey, it's stronger than the snake and the bird and a baby crocodile or something. The monkey wins out, and he goes to the forest and he gets the fruit. But then the monkey gets tired from pulling and pulling all the other animals. So then the snake wins, and the snake goes towards its spot. And each animal wants to go to its own domain, its own pasture, its own habitual place of kind of getting stimulation. And what the Buddha says is we have to take a firm post, plant it in the ground, and tie the animals to the post. So they pull and pull and pull, but eventually they get tired and they settle down. And the post, he says, is mindfulness, specifically of the body, but it's really referring to mindfulness of your senses, like your body with the sense organs, and becoming aware of them pulling and not giving in and developing that. So becoming aware within the framework of knowing the gratification, danger, and escape. And I hope that that's helpful. But going cold turkey, sort of. I mean, you could.
Yeah, I could maybe say something that's maybe just briefly, just that. Because I worked with addiction, and then you do need to separate for something like sugar, and then binge watching. I guess that media. So bringing your awareness, like he was saying, the mindfulness. But I would try maybe choose one or the other. Like if they're merging, like you're doing a lot of sugar and watching something, binge watching. With the watching, you can choose like to say, okay, I'm going to choose to watch, very intentionally choosing to watch something that's helpful. And then I don't know if there's a way of timing it. Is I have this amount of time, and then have a distinct stopping point. So you don't have to completely cut out the behavior, but you're substituting. And try to not merge the two problems, the sugar and but when you, I would cut down gradually on sugar, because you're going to have you will withdraw. You will have a physical withdrawal. And so just be aware of how much you're consuming, and then cut it back. I would definitely cut it back, and really try to bring awareness to the whole phenomena of what's happening. And I have a feeling that there's some unpleasant mental states that are rising that you're trying to mask over. So find out what that is. Be aware of, it's anger or anxiety or any other unwholesome mental state. Greed, I think just being greedy, you could, sometimes when I see myself wanting to overeat, I can just say, oh, this is greed. I feel greed. How does this greed feel? And it's uncomfortable. So I'm compelled to do something, like put something in my mouth. But I can redirect, just say, okay. Sometimes if I just say, oh, that's greed. I see the greed. And then I can let go of it, and then bring my mind to something more wholesome, helpful. And I recommend moderation rather than cold turkey. It's cold, something like that. Unless you're in a clinic and you're under supervision, and somebody is setting up a program for you to what to do with your time. Then you're not going to be successful with cold turkey. So I hope that's helpful.
Okay.
And so go to the next
So
one.
we have a question, a quick one from Tony. Did Buddha give up Hinduism in order to seek enlightenment? Maybe I'll just briefly, really quickly say the answer is no. Hinduism didn't exist at the time, actually. And the Buddha, really, really briefly speaking, he probably grew up in a very diverse religious context. He probably was familiar with Brahmanism, which is not the same as Hinduism, and it's kind of pre-Hinduism. It's related to their sacrifices and rituals and things like that. And he was probably also familiar with other movements, like maybe Jainism and other movements that are called Shramana movements in the area. But he was probably trained in something called Brahmanism. You could think of it, it's the Vedas, but a lot of times people think that's Hinduism. It's actually very, very different. So, for instance, they killed animals. They're not vegetarian.
So you're getting longer.
Yeah, I'm just gonna. So basically, he didn't give up Hinduism. He probably was just familiar with other systems, but he probably studied under teachers who were familiar with Brahminical ideas, and then eventually left. So it's not so simple, but he was familiar with other ideas for sure.
Yeah,
he definitely dialogued with them.
Yeah, if you listen to Bhante Sujato too, he does talk about that he must have studied the Vedas and
Mm-hmm.
other, but not Hinduism.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So Joe says, warmest greetings. Could you kindly share some helpful ways to cultivate metta and harmony with the 7 factors of awakening?
Ah, well, that's a good question. So, metta is one of the um, aspects of metta is a form of mindfulness. That it's a type of. Oh, could you leave the question up?
Mm-hmm. It's
Oh,
up here.
okay. I thought you moved it. Okay. So it's in the Karaniya Metta Sutta. It says that what one should sustain this recollection, or this. Talks about as a sati, as a mindfulness. So when you're cultivating metta bhavana, it is a form of remembering, of recollecting, and it can be very body based too. The experience of the you can experience piti or rapture, and you can experience the sukha as well. You can experience the body, all of the body, if you're really practicing well, if you're really cultivating this feeling of metta. And so when you're staying with the metta as an object of meditation and sustaining that for a long period of time, you're sustaining a type of mindfulness. And then so that you're also abandoning the hindrances. If you can abandon all 5 hindrances, if you're cultivating metta bhavana well, especially anger and ill will, but it overcomes greed or sense desire. It'll overcome ill will. It'll overcome restlessness. The mind will become really bright and alive, and so it'll overcome drowsiness. And then you'll have no doubt in your mind about the Buddhist teachings, because it's such a it's just kind of proving some of the teachings about the joy that arises and the peacefulness that arises when you're cultivating the practice. So you're kind of setting the stage, and then you can shift that into other types of sati, and you can have really well-grounded sati because you've overcome all 5 hindrances, and your mind has stayed with the object. You're not going to get to that state of really illuminated metta unless you've stayed with it for a long period of time. And so you have sustained mindfulness, and you can shift from the metta bhavana to anapanasati. You can be going back and forth between the two, but then your mind is so free of hindrances and joyful that the sati will be sustained for a long period of time. So then at a certain point, when you've sustained the anapanasati, it can become an enlightened, the mindfulness of the breath. This can be an enlightenment factor of sati. It's a sati sambojjhanga. and then you can start applying your mind to investigating the Dhamma Vijaya. And then it's going to take off. Those factors are going to be fueled by the energy of that comes from the well-sustained metta bhavana and the well-sustained anapanasati, it's just gonna take off. If to the other factors, the other 7 factors, the energy is aroused, and you've already had the piti and the it's interesting how piti is or the rapture is an enlightenment factor, but that's like the fuel, the energy, and then the mind will calm down to passaddhi, and then the word for samadhi. There's many people have different ideas about what samadhi should be called. And I won't say the C word.
Concentration.
So immersion, stillness, collectedness of mind.
It's a C word.
Oh well,
Is that the one?
that's another one. That's the. Anyway, so the mind will definitely settle into samadhi, but this is a very, very high level, and it upeka. So yeah, so cultivating metta in harmony, yeah. So then these they'll support. It's a supportive, especially since it can be used to overcome the hindrances, and this is a big. You can't just get into the enlightenment factors unless you've eradicated the hindrances and you've sustained the mindfulness long enough. And with the anapanasati, it is said to fulfill the 7 factors of awakening. So I hope that's helpful. That's a starting point, at least. And it is said in the suttas that these two, this metta bhavana with the 7 enlightenment factors are mutually compatible and supportive. And what's that other word for it? It's a symbiotic. It's not biological, but anyway, that idea.
Great. Thank you, Aya.
There's some other word probably for it, but I can't think of it now. Mutually
something.
supportive. It's yeah.
Yeah. Okay, John has a question. The Buddha taught asevanacha balanang, so usually translated as not to associate with fools. How should we distinguish between the wise and the foolish? How should we handle those in modern life with whom we must associate who are bala? Okay, so yeah, I mean, I would say the main thing that this is addressing is really your active relationships, your active friendships. So if you just are walking down the street or you're at work and somebody seems to be a fool within 10 feet of you, you're not really associated with fools. You're around foolish people. And if you were doing that a lot, it would be, you would be encouraged not to associate with those spaces. But so it's really more about our intentions. Now, of course, there are times that come up where unintentionally we're around a lot of fools, which this isn't getting to the part of how we know yet, but and we do need to make changes because we find that, oh, I'm ending up in situations where I'm being influenced or being pressured to act unskillfully around a lot of people. And that's really what the foolish boils down to. In Buddhism, fools are people who you could say they think that what is unskillful is skillful, and they think that what is skillful is unskillful. They don't associate with the noble ones, is one way of putting it in terms of the suttas, and they speak illy. So it's basically people who their guides in life are actually the opposite of what we cultivate. They're the opposite of what the Buddha taught. They're the opposite of people who would be considered noble in the Buddhist teaching. And they don't cultivate what is wholesome. So, for instance, people who like to do lots of drinking and drugs, right? So there's a common, when you're growing up, people say, oh, peer pressure, don't associate because you're going to be pressured to do drugs and things like that. That's kind of common wisdom of not associating with fools, because if you're around people who enjoy intoxicating the mind, diluting the mind, becoming dull, and then doing the other problem with associating with those types of people is that if they're doing those activities, they're also probably going to be doing other unskillful activities with it, or you're going to be around people who are more likely to get involved in unskillful activities. And so you're just putting yourself in a dangerous situation in general, even if in terms of the teaching or physically, even if you're not drinking. So the idea is that those people are going to impact, they're going to have a wrong, you could say a bad, what's the word for it? Influence. They're going to have a bad influence on you, and you're going to be putting yourself in situations, and even if they don't influence you, you're going to be putting yourself in situations where unskillful behavior is going on. And so you're going to have to manage and navigate that unskillful behavior, which means that you're not really going to be growing and learning from people who are better than us. We really want to be looking ahead to people who know better than us, who have trained themselves. That's why we admire the Buddha. That's why we admire the noble Sangha. And we recollect these qualities because we want to be associating with people who can help us grow, not just people who are even on the same level as us. So like in the Kagavisana Sutta, that's the sutta in the rhino's or the rhino's horn, it says that if you can't find a good friend or someone that's at least equal to you, you're better to wander alone. And that's really, it's referring mostly to monastics, but you can also take it in lay life, is that if all your friends are just dragging you down, the Buddha's teaching, really the core of it is saying you'd actually be better off alone. You'd be better off practicing without any friends than being surrounded by people who do unskillful things, they encourage unskillful things, they don't look to skillful things, they don't cultivate skillful things, and they're confused. You'd be better off not being around anybody. But of course, that's an extreme. And like you say, in modern life, a lot of times we have to associate with people who are foolish. So that's why really the emphasis is on what can you control. And let's say that you can't control some people who you're around. Could be work, could be family, could be sometimes friendships even. You might have a friend who you decide, okay, I'm not going to spend a lot of time with them. I'm not going to associate with them a lot. But you can't just all of a sudden, we have compassion as well for some people. They might, be in a situation where just completely not speaking with them and disappearing isn't the right decision, right? So in those cases, we try to learn from that opportunity. So we try to see how is the mind influenced or relating to unskillful behavior, and how are we cultivating our mind in relation to it. So if people are doing unskillful things, we start to learn to distinguish, okay, I'm in this situation, and we develop mindfulness of our own body, speech, and mind, how we're relating to it. And we try to cultivate and navigate it skillfully. It's kind of like the hard level, right? Being around really skillful people, it's easier in a sense because you always have a kind of guide. When you're around really unskillful people, it's the very difficult level, because if you're not very well trained, you're going to fall into that behavior, or you're going to react unskillfully. So if people are say they're verbally abusive towards you, and you're around people who don't see a problem with that or support it, well, you might end up using harsh speech or wrong speech or false speech. So it's going to be harder. So what you really try to do is you try to hold on to your principles, and you try to almost take the foolish as a teacher of what not to do, right? Rather than thinking of them as just getting caught up in what's going on, you try to associate as if they were giving you an example of what you don't do. If someone wise is saying, oh, don't do this, then this is kind of and then you try to navigate that. And so you try to control it, you try to regulate it, and you try to watch your body, speech, and mind. And really, I would say, if you do the next step, sevana chabalanam pandita ancha sevana, That means associating with the wise. A lot of times we focus, oh, shouldn't be around fools, but how actively are we pursuing wise influences? If you have a lot of wise influences, a few foolish ones won't be such a big deal probably. But if you're only focused on everyone around me is a fool, then that's probably not going to be a healthy attitude, and it's not going to be the best solution. So that's some words on that, and I hope it's beneficial. Hello, Mary. Mary says hello.
Hello, you can join us.
And Sood has a question.
Take the next one, Sood.
What is the difference between mundane Eightfold Path and the super mundane Eightfold Path?
Well, that's a very good question. Yeah, so the mundane, first way I heard it explained is that with the mundane path, we're walking along it and we fall off it from time to time, or we're wavering off of it from time to time. And so that's what's popped into my mind right away, is that we can't always keep all the factors of the path well. But there is a level of awakening that happens to make it super mundane. So the Sotapanna, the right view is described as understanding the Four Noble Truths. That's one of the descriptions of Samadhi, is that it, and then the analysis of the past, that's the description the Lord Buddha had for it, is that the right view is to understand, to have a breakthrough to the understanding, a deep understanding of the Four Noble Truths enters you into the stream. So you're starting out, so it starts to become super mundane. The path factors, you're not going to waver off of the path factors that are related to sila. And so even with right, sankapo, when your intention is more clear, you really understand clearly that you wish to abandon the harmful behaviors. So maybe the renunciation is maybe not so developed, but the other ones, the factors of non-harming, you wouldn't intentionally harm, or you wouldn't, an ill will would be, at least it would, well, actually that would be, yeah, you'd be starting to develop the mental factors of right intention, but the right speech and right action, you wouldn't be doing the harmful behaviors. You would, there would be no reason that you would be doing that. You just, and if you did accidentally cause harm to another being, or you accidentally, let's say, absentmindedly took something like a pen or something like that, that would be seem like you may be stealing, then you'd feel right away that you would try to remediate it, and you would, if you felt, so you're staying on the path quite a lot more consistently, because you understand clearly the consequences of your action. You really are getting the idea of the laws of karma and what's causing suffering in the world. So you're not wanting to cause more harm in the world. And so your path factors are becoming purified as you go along. Of course, you'd keep a livelihood. You keep a livelihood that wasn't harming others, and then the factors that are related to concentration or samadhi. the samadhi factors, the sama vayamo, sama sati, sama samadhi. Those you've probably developed to a certain degree to help you understand the Noble Eightfold Path. So all of it's kind of mutually supporting this direction towards deeper states of samadhi and then deeper levels of awakening. So that's probably all I could say in a shorter period of time about that. So I hope that's helpful. Was he having a second question?
It looks like it was the same one, just repeated.
Okay.
Okay.
So that's the difference, is that you've most likely have entered the stream and you're on your way if you have super mundane, and then you're kind of fumbling along as a patujana. But you have enough faith to keep it, and so keep working on it if you're not already there to the stream entry. So
in HPD, your question, I'm not entirely sure what it is referring to, so I'm not going to try to guess, but if you want to ask, clarify that, feel free to send it in. Julie has a question.
Okay.
It feels like I should switch from touching points meditation to a similar method. How to know it's not kilesa, my reason for change? Any additional thoughts? It's really hard to say because you're not here and we don't know the details of your scenario. So all I would say is, if you're trying to change the way that you're practicing, if it's rooted in abandoning greed, hatred, and delusion, it's rooted in developing wholesome qualities, and you assess your mind that that's what your goal is, it's not kilesas. If it's rooted in something like, I want to change method because I tried this for a day and it's not going so easy for me. Maybe there's something that's more quick and instant and I'll be enlightened quicker with another method. That's not really the right attitude. But if your attitude is like, I'm trying this and I feel it's not really working so well for me, I've been doing it, I'd like to try something else, and remove greed, hatred, and delusion, and you kind of understand really understanding how the change would actually affect that. Not just, if you don't understand, try. I would say that's the best start. That's all the best way to address that for now. So looking at your motivation and trying to understand how the change will actually affect the goal that you're going for. Hope that's helpful. Robert has a question. What is your opinion on repeating mantras, specifically related to practice during seated meditation? I have found I will die, my loved ones will die, there is nothing to do but practice is helpful.
Well, I guess we're using a term mantra from a different religion, and so it sounds like what you're doing is a reflection. So repeating something that you've created yourself, a reflection. Ajahn Brahm, actually, he gave this instruction for when a person does walking meditation, that if you're moving your left foot, say, and you say, I will die. And the next step, moving your other foot, that's for sure. I will die, each step. And so it's just, that's a reflecting. So you're saying, I will die, my loved ones will die. There is nothing to do but practice. So you're bringing up a sense of urgency in yourself. So I think I wouldn't make that the only thing that I do, because if you say there's nothing else to do but practice, this is only a piece of it. It's an important piece. And like I was saying, it's to generate a sense of urgency to apply oneself to the practice. So if you have another kind of, okay, I will die, that's for sure. I will keep my sila pure.
Is that a rhyming poem? Is it a haiku?
So,
Let's see the syllables on that.
So, you have to think that you've got to have a broader picture than that. And so I will die, my loved ones will die, and I need to practice. So part of my practice is keeping my sila well. Part of my practice is studying the Dhamma. Part of my practice is some seated meditation or walking meditation. So I would say, yeah, so that's really great. And I would, maybe you would, I don't know how much you're meditating. Repeating, is this during the sitting?
I think if Robert has nothing to do but practice, he's got plenty of time.
Yeah, so then I don't know what Robert has on. Yeah, so it should be part of a kind of a program of practice, a well-rounded practice. So so there's nothing wrong with that. It's a type of reflection.
Great.
Good on you.
And HPD has a question. Different one. Please disregard the first one they say. Dear Venerables, what is your opinion about American Buddhism like Shambhala and New Kadampa something? Can't remember what it stands for. Why don't you think Americans seek express Buddhism? Why don't think Americans seek express Buddhism? Well, your question is a little bit vague, and all I can personally, and maybe Aya has different experience, but I don't have a lot of experience with Shambhala or New Kadampa. My only opinion about Shambhala and New Kadampa is that they're both forms, I believe, especially connected with Tibetan Buddhism.
Vajrayana.
Yeah, Vajrayana. And I believe also that New Kadampa is quite infamous for several interesting views, and they split off. And so personally, I would never recommend someone go there. And I know people have had bad experiences, but I can't really, I haven't been. And so it's a kind of outside of the scope of what we do here. Vajrayana, it's a different tradition, and it's not really, what we're doing. And New Kadampa is even further from that, because it's not even within the mainstream. It's kind of considered a cult, actually, and a slightly dangerous movement. So I don't know, Aya, if you had any thoughts on that one.
I'm looking at the last line about Americans seeking express Buddhism. And I think that this is a thing that Americans have a tendency to want to have instant enlightenment or something like that, or the easy way or something like that. And one size fits all. And we can drink our glass of wine or whatever
This is water.
Afterwards. We're both drinking water. But it is a different tradition. I don't want to put down other people's practice if they're doing it sincerely. If it's doing things that harm other people, stay away from it. If it's causing, and I don't recommend anything that endorses breaking precepts, but if you're a layperson, that gives you a lot more leeway.
Great. Thank you, Aya. Words of wisdom. And okay, Karuna has a question. Hello, Venerables. I'm not getting a good sense of menosan chetana based on English renderings, i.e. volition, mental intention. Can you expand further on its meaning, especially as a nutriment?
No.
Sanchetana.
So this is a volition of the mind. Mental volition. Mental intention.
She's not getting a good sense of it based on
I would have to see it in context, because things in context, I'm not sure where you're drawing it from. Because things in context, it makes a lot of...
Well, she's asking as a nutriment. So, I mean, as the third nutriment, manosan chetana is the Buddha gives a simile, which I'm sure you know if you're asking the question.
I'm just familiar with it, Chetana, but okay. So that's what I was saying. It's out of context for me. So,
well, I can just, I mean, as far as what I understand of the question, I would say the simile of menosan chetana as a nutriment is two strong men grab you by the arms and they start dragging you towards a pit of hot coals, and you scream and squirm and you don't want to go, but they throw you in there against your will. And so my understanding of this from what I have seen in other suttas is that no matter, even if we don't, samsara is often compared to a charcoal pit. And so that being in the senses and getting reborn over and over again, it's a horrible state is the strong way of putting it. And we are stuck here because our mind is constantly, manosan chetana, it's related to karma, it's related to sankhara. So sanchetana, the chetana is related to chitta and its intention, like you said, and sanchetana is really just a different word for it, and it's related to sankhara and of the mind, as I said. It's related to kind of karma and our mental intentions, which drive us into samsara. So the Buddha relates it to craving, and it's not quite the same, but he says, for instance, the nutriment of feeling, the nutriment of contact, if you understand that, you understand feeling. If you understand the nutriment of manos and chetana, you understand craving. And the idea is that our intentions, that kind of our mind is directed towards things and it intends towards things and it creates decisions and it creates this reality around it. And then even if we don't want, let's say someone does really bad karma, they go to hell, a lower realm. They're just drugged there against their will, because they don't want to go, but their mind has created those conditions because of its intentions, because of its decisions and how it directs itself. And so if we really understand that, we get rid of all desire, all craving for existence and also non-existence and sensuality. So my understanding of it is it's essentially how the mind, how we feed on our mind directing towards things and in making, intending towards things and getting caught up in the world of samsara by kind of creating active karma rather than relinquishment and removal of that. So we even though we don't want to suffer, we constantly have our mind creating, getting itself stuck in here. So it's like the two men just drag you into the pit, even though you don't want to go there. And the men are your own mind, kind of. That's how I understand that, briefly.
Yeah,
do you
I
have
guess
anything, Aya? Or should we do the next?
Let me look at it again. So you're not getting a good sense of it based on the English rendering. Yeah, I guess it is a big part of what keeps us in the round of existence, and then we are being dragged. It's almost like we're dragging ourselves into the pit. It's more that than the karma, our own karma. It is related to karma. Our own karma is what's dragging us there, but we're also pulling ourselves. So, yeah.
Okay.
So
Great.
It's probably good enough. I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Okay. See, Julius, looks like that's a different question. Or the same question, I'm sorry. And
Kim says so.
Hello.
Hello from Kim.
And Naresh, is there any mantra to calm the mind?
So, there's that word mantra again. So this repeating phrases and a lot of times mantras are often in the other traditions, it'll be the name of some kind of deity that they're trying to bring closer to themselves, or them become closer to that deity. So I've been around people deeply doing that kind of a practice of japas, and repeating a deity's name, and so that can very much calm somebody's mind down. In the Buddhist practice, some people have phrases like reflections, like Robert earlier was saying, reflecting on the impermanence of the body, and the knowledge that we'll all die. And so for some people, that may even be calming. Some people may have a little bit difficulty with that. So we have to find for ourselves what is helpful. And I don't know if you understand Pali. If there's some Pali phrases that may be helpful, then that's good. I sometimes say the metta phrases in Pali. That seem to help. It helps me more than the English, because I can't find it. Some of the words that we translate into English, I don't like the way they sound. It's not evoking enough of the sense of what the Pali is expressing. So it depends on what your language of origin, your mother tongue, may be more calming than a foreign language. So it's not. I don't think there's a one size fits all phrase that would be calming. I think that's something that you might need to discover for yourself. But I would reflect on something from the Buddhist teaching that, and it may be something with the Brahma Viharas, to cultivate loving kindness or metta, friendliness. What's another word for metta?
Love.
Love.
Sujata's translation of metta.
Benevolence.
Goodwill.
Goodwill. Wishing for oneself and all beings. It depends. Like some people have a hard time starting with themselves, but it's very important. So looking into the Brahma Viharas and maybe finding some phrases that really are calming and beautiful.
Right.
So that's what I would recommend. But you need to discover for yourselves, because everybody has a different heart.
Great. Thank you, Aya. And okay, so Tony doesn't have a question, just says this is not to agree, talking about Hinduism and the Ramayana and things like that. And just briefly, what I would say, Tony, is it's important to distinguish what we call Hinduism today from the practices in ancient India. So that's what's important in understanding the Buddha. So I'm not gonna. We don't have a lot of time to go into the historical details, but all I would say is just for understanding the Buddha, at his time, what people nowadays practice and call Hinduism, which is many different things, that's not what they were practicing before. But that's not to say that the ideas weren't present, or that the religious beliefs of modern people who believe in certain ideas that are now called Hinduism, that's not to say that those beliefs are invalid. It's just that the religious practices were different. So if you look at, say, the Mahabharata, well, actually, some of the Mahabharata starts around the time of the Buddha historically as a document, but that doesn't mean that the events it's telling in there didn't actually happen. I'm not claiming that. It's just the document itself, right? So the religious practices were different. So that's why we say the Buddha, he wasn't in an environment where people were practicing Hinduism, but that doesn't mean that the beliefs or the certain ideas weren't present. It's just not quite the same thing.
What it developed from,
Mm-hmm.
what modern Hinduism developed from.
It's like saying, was Jesus a Catholic, right? He wasn't a Catholic, but that doesn't mean that the concepts in Catholicism, some of them don't have, it's not to say that they don't have roots in the time of Jesus.
Okay.
So,
Anyway, it's just.
hello, Marky.
And
And John has a question. Do you think Americans of this age must use bridge practices in order to genuinely practice Buddhism? Here, I mean things like inner healing, reversing antisocial narratives, finding good friends. I think that's the end. Looks like it. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on that, Aya?
I would say no.
Okay.
That's a short answer. And yeah, you're talking about genuine practice of Buddhism, and then there's too much mixing in. I mean, it would be like saying, do you think that people should go to work? Can they practice Buddhism if they go to work? So you don't have to blend everything together. You can't say, oh, I'm practicing right livelihood, but to be practicing genuine Buddhism, I don't think you need if you're just practicing kindness and all these kind of things that the Buddha talks about, honesty, kindness, developing the mind. Maybe these things will come up as a result of it, but it's not going to be essential for genuine Buddhist practice.
Great. Thank you, Aya, for dispelling myths. I suppose. I don't know if it's just myths, but.
Well, no, it's not essential.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you're talking about genuine.
It's right inner healing, Sama inner healing.
Yeah.
Okay, Sele has a question. In order to get the Dhamma eye, does one need mindfulness that allows to examine everything as anatta? Yes and no. I mean, I don't want to. Personally, I wouldn't say. When you say needs mindfulness that allows to examine everything as anatta, I don't know if this is what you're thinking of, but I'm kind of picking up like a technique where you start noting everything as that's not self, not self, not self. That kind of, mindfulness of like specifically trying to apply this framework of anatta to your experience. And there's many ways to get right view. You don't need to be, intentionally applying this framework of, I'm going to think of everything as anatta with my mindfulness. That could get you to let go, but it really is, the Dhamma is not specifically that, but you do need mindfulness and you do need to understand anatta. But the understanding comes with the Dhamma. It doesn't come from trying to push what you think anatta is onto yourself until eventually you believe it. You understand it once you let go, and then you realize everything is impermanent. There is no, everything in my experience has the nature of arising and ceasing. Everything I thought that was solid, it all disappears. So that kind of understanding versus trying to, I think that this is what anatta is, and I'm going to say it to myself until I believe it. That wouldn't really be right. So I hope that that's helpful. But you definitely need mindfulness, and you definitely need to examine your experience and understand that what we take as to be ourself is not, should not be taken that way, the Buddha says. And Kumo has a question. Mental volition is mentioned as a nutriment for a being in the Mahatanha Sankhya Sutta, along with food, contact, and consciousness. Is this consciousness outside of the sense-based consciousness?
I don't think so. The nutriment of consciousness, no, it's not outside. I mean, it's the nutriment is for all beings to be continuing birth. So it would be sense-based still to nurture that, to nurture rebirth.
Okay, thank you, Aya. And Sud has a question. Looks like it's two-parter here. Dear Venerables, if one practices metta strongly, given that they wouldn't be doing anything unskillful while in metta, would they be automatically fulfilling the Eightfold Path factors and thereby progressing on the path? I don't know if you wanted to take this one, Aya, since you talked about metta and the path.
Automatically fulfilling the Eightfold Path factors. I think it said it's in the Anguttara Nikaya in the 11th, but 11 doors of the deathless, and the metta bhavana is when it's completely fulfilling its purpose. It is actually one of the doors to the deathless. And then, so you have to fulfill the Noble Eightfold Path. But I don't think that alone, you have to be working. I mean, I think have to be keeping your sila well and developing understanding of the Buddhist teaching in order for it to be able, it gets in that particular sutta talks about becoming to a jhanic state, and then you look back at it with insight and you see the impermanent nature of the mind has created this very exalted state, and that too is impermanent. That too is
is
and
true. Even that
is impermanent. Even that is not self. It's not mine. It's anatta. It's
what should we cling to then?
And then then there's and then you see the subtle dukkha of it even. So, but I think in order to get to that point, you've had to be working with other path factors. So that alone, just somebody. They may go up into the Brahma worlds and think that they're enlightened and they've discovered nirvana because it's so blissful and wonderful. And but unless they're rooted in the teachings, they have some understanding of the teachings, and they're keeping their sila well, then that alone won't do it.
So it sounds like you're saying right view, Aya.
Yeah, so you have to have right view as well as right action. Right, you do have to practice the other path factors. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Aya. And John has a follow-up sort of question. What do you think of the concept of inner healing? Just like we can heal the body, we can heal our heart. I would say that's a good concept. I would say that's kind of actually that's the practice of Buddhism. The idea is that the idea in Buddhism is that the body, we should take care of it, but ultimately it's up to nature to get sick. And so ultimately we can only heal it temporarily, but that we can't find lasting satisfaction in that. If we try to have perfect health all the time, it won't work. So the idea in Buddhism is that we should heal our mind. And it doesn't mean we neglect our body, but we really try to heal the heart. And the mind in Buddhism is, and not just in Buddhism, but the concept of the mind, sometimes we think it's like up here, it's the brain, and it's like the analytical thinking, that's the mind. But actually the mind includes what we might traditionally call the heart. And sometimes the word heart actually might be better to get at what we're talking about, because we're really talking about, for instance, anger or emotional feelings and longing and sorrow and grief, or strong desire and greed and intention. So a lot of that emotional, that kind of suffering, that's what we call, sometimes it's even called the heart mind. So it's kind of like our thinking and discursive processes and our emotions and how we relate, everything in there. That's Buddhism's about healing that. The Buddha says it's plucking out the dart. from the heart. Like we're struck in the chest with this dart, and that's like the heart. Our heart is struck, and we try to pull it out. And the Buddha is the physician. He's a doctor, who the Noble Eightfold Path is kind of the medicine, right? So I don't know when you say inner healing, if that's a specific term that is, has its own kind of context. I don't know. So I can't speak to that. But I could say that Buddhism is inner healing in a sense. We are trying to heal the inside, and we recognize that the outside is not really reliable. And also, if it's inner healing in the sense of like temporary, like you're managing your mental suffering by healing, kind of temporarily purging it, I'd say that's beneficial as long as it's not unskillful. It's still good. Like if you're so much mental suffering that you can't even focus on developing deeper purification, we have to heal ourselves where we're at. We can't, if a doctor sees a really sick patient and they say, oh, you're never going to get over, I don't know, your body is so weak that I can't even start healing this disease that you have because your body is not I don't know. I can't think of a good simile here, but essentially if the doctor is trying to cure the body in a very subtle sense, like make the person a top athlete, and they say, oh, I can't cure your symptoms, your course disease here because you're not going to be a top athlete or something. It doesn't work like that. The doctor has to address where the patient is at. So if the patient has a disease that means that they can't walk, then the doctor doesn't try to get them running like an Olympic athlete, right? They start where they're at. So Buddhism, ultimately, we're kind of becoming the Olympians of the heart. We're becoming really masters of it. We're not just talking about a little bit of stress reduction. So, but if we have too much stress, then we do have to reduce it. To a degree. So there is inner healing, but I hope that that's helpful for addressing the question.
So Mary
has a question about the outer healing of the building.
Let's see.
Do we still have heat? Did the plumber come to assist with the boiler?
Oh yes. No. We have heat because the Kin and Ayawada has they've been tinkering with it a little bit, but it's unreliable. It's gone off and on and off several times. So thank you for your kind inquiry. And that's so the plumber has not come, and at the moment we have heat.
Great.
But that's uncertain.
We'll see if it lasts.
Yeah, it goes off on a regular. It somehow clicks off and doesn't come back on.
There's a loose part or wire inside the machine that someone will need to take a look at.
Yeah,
for a permanent solution.
So we should probably not take too much time. But thank you so much for asking. You're very kind to ask that question, Mary.
Sadhu.
So I could maybe look at the next question because that wasn't really a Dhamma question. We let Mary sneak in a non-Dhammic question.
Oh no!
Although
don't get any ideas.
But we could hold it in the Dhamma because it's a thought of loving kindness and.
And Mary also has a follow-up. For now. Plumber will be there soon. Sadhu.
Sadhu.
We really appreciate your carefulness.
Yeah. So this is
Mary.
compassion in action.
Great.
So that is Dhammic.
So Mariah has a question. How do you recommend not getting pulled away from my meditation object once deep states of calm or rapture arise? When I put effort to get back to the breath, the calm or rapture is gone. Can I stay with the breath and get absorbed in these deep states simultaneously, or does it necessarily need to be one or the other?
Well, it may merge at a certain point. I think if you're staying with the breath for a long time, it depends too if it seems like it's a distraction rather than getting you more collected. Getting pulled away from the object. So there's not if there's no intent. It's good to have an intention to know the mind is stable enough I've stayed with the object long enough, and then this is the time to change to another object. And if just the feeling of rapture and excitement in the body, it might not be stable enough. You say, once deep calm, states of calm or rapture arise. So they're arising spontaneously. If it's just if the rapture is really strong and it's so distracting, there's a instruction in the suttas to pervade the body with that, and even if it's not in a jhanic state, you can experience rapture, and it might be unsettled. You can see if is this unsettling rather than is it energetic and so just kind of evaluate, is it a distraction to it seems like you're getting pulled away from your object. So yeah, you can be aware of the breath and be experiencing piti or rapture or a lot of charged energy in the body. I don't know how you're experiencing the rapture, but there is a way. But I think that yeah, if it's not, yeah, you don't want. I don't think you particularly want the PT to be the focus, because the PT is too unstable. It seems like it's a kind of what do you call it? Hijacking your attention a little bit. So I think if the mind is stable enough on the object and the rapture isn't just pulling you away, then they can you don't have to lose the breath. So but getting pulled away and then efforting to pull back.
It sounds like when she stays with the breath, it disappears.
Yeah, so it may be that if the breath disappears too soon and the rapture is just kind of taking over, I'm just trying to think about how to without really kind of jerking yourself back and forth like you got so I would you're putting effort into getting back to the breath. That's what I'm just because you may be forcing yourself. You might be trying to force yourself too much. So inviting the breath, like aware that the rapture is very strong, and you may need to wait and say, oh, like if you're like in the forest and there's some birds that you're a bird watcher, right? And you're in the forest there with your binoculars, and you have to sit very still, and you're waiting for the bird to fly past. You know that the bird is nesting in this tree, and so you wait, and you're really paying attention to where the breath may be arising. So especially if you're sensing the breath in one spot, because there may be big gaps in the breath too at the same time as the rapture is arising, but just kind of like bring the idea of the breath again and not try to force yourself, because the breath may be very subtle at that point. So you have to be I'm trying to get words so it's not sounding too forceful, but to put, like you're just waiting, and your attention is to where the breath should be. I hope this is making some sense. But if it, yeah, so, but I would try to stabilize the breath much more before, and not using the rapture as a focus of attention. Because it isn't there isn't an intentionality with it, and that rapture is not such a good object anyway. So it is possible to be aware of the breath and experience rapture.
Great, thank you, Aya.
So I hope that's helpful.
Words of encouragement. And Nimala says, is there any particular chanting to purify the mind at the root level? No. Sadly, there is no chanting, no syllables that can purify the mind. The only way to purify the mind at the root level is through mental development, deep relinquishment, and clarity and serenity. No matter what words we use, it won't affect it. And this is what the Buddha calls Silabbata Paramasa. Wrongly grasping religious practices is how I would almost put it in a simple way, is that if we think that by chanting or using certain phrases or certain types of religious activities, we purify our mind, the Buddha says that that's not understanding the right function of those activities. So chanting is only a practice that it might help us. Maybe our mind is so unstable and so caught up in the senses that giving it some kind of neutral activity will help it settle and become more clear within its experience, more calm. But really, it comes down to the actual mental development and mental understanding and seeing our mind and calming our mind via that mental development. Not any kind of chanting will purify it. Unfortunately, I wish there were. If there were a root chant that would purify the mind at the core, then I would hope that the Buddha would have said so. All this practice, actually there's a chant we could do, but he didn't mention it because it's not the nature of the mind, unfortunately. Stevie asks, as a monastic person, is it safe to assume you do not want a rebirth and you hope to attain the deathless state?
Not everyone. So there's different types of monastics, and people go into monastic life for various reasons. In the Buddhist culture, there are people that enter monastic life to make merit for their deceased ancestors. And there's some that believe it's not possible, and this is even in the Theravada tradition, that it's not possible to attain the final that nibbana, to actualize parinibbana in this era, and that we have to wait till the Maitreya Buddha appears in the world, and we hope that they're hoping they make enough merit to be reborn during that era. So they're busily making merit in the world. So a monastic, so you can't make an assumption of why. It may be they think it's an easy way to make a living. You can't make that assumption. And some that really want to help other people in the world, and they're dedicated to doing social work. And maybe they're making they're making merit that way. So there's a lot of reasons why a person would go into monastic, and I'm assuming you're talking about Buddhist monastics. And if you're a Mahayana monastic, then you wouldn't want to attain the deathless state, because you have this vow until to help all beings, and no matter how many lifetimes it takes, innumerable lifetimes, endless lifetimes. Yeah, so so you can't make that assumption.
But as far as at Empty Cloud, generally speaking, we don't. The monastics residents here, including, I believe, one of the resident guests, Ayasuvijana, this monastery is really focused on practicing for liberation, generally speaking. Just if you're asking about here, yeah, that's generally the focus. Every now and then people come, and we're open to, good-hearted people, but that's really what we're doing here. And I think that's the end. We just have this one closing question. Is there any particular sutta to purify the mind? Well, that's a nice try. There's no chanting. There might be a sutta. And unfortunately, a sutta is also a religious practice, actually. Reading suttas, chanting suttas is a religious practice. And if we think that by just repeating the words, or by just, this sutta will purify me, but if by understanding the sutta with the Noble Eightfold Path, with right view and all the other path factors, and the sutta is the impetus for you to really develop those path factors in full, the Buddha says even while reciting the Dhamma, while reflecting on the Dhamma, we can attain liberation. If everything is in line, then the sutta could be an impetus, but the sutta doesn't do it. What does it is the mind, the mental development, and the understanding and the letting go. So the sutta won't purify you. And if you think it's in the sutta, then it won't lead to the right Noble Eightfold Path.
And what I would recommend is just start reading the suttas. And if there's one that resonates with you, then just keep going back to it. That's what happens for me. Is I started reading 20 years ago, the Majjhima Nikaya, and I go back to some of the suttas, and then I get a deeper understanding because my practice has developed. So I think just really looking closely, looking at different translations, letting it seep in, and eventually you may hit on the one that really is the right one for you to purify the mind.
Okay, well, that's the end of Monk Chat. So I hope that you all have a beautiful night, and that your practice goes smoothly, and that this has been helpful for your practice.
So I'm wishing you all freedom from every kind of suffering, and liberation of the heart, and well-being on all levels, both through body, speech, and mind. May they be healed. May they be happy, internally, externally.
And we'll close the 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu to the Buddha.